Welcome and thank you for joining me for this quiet journey into the past. In this story, we will take a long, gentle walk through medieval Europe. At the center of the town, where streets draw toward one another like threads to a spindle, rises the church tower. Its stone is old and weather-mellowed, patched here and there with newer blocks that shine a paler gray. In morning light, the tower looks almost gentle, but up close, it is a thing of strength. Deep-set slits for windows, a narrow door of oak bound in iron, and the faint ring marks on the step where countless feet have turned in and out. At its crown, shuttered arches hold the dark mouths of bells that have spoken to the town for longer than anyone living can remember. Before dawn, when the streets still dream and frost sits in the seams of the cobbles, Aldrich the bellman comes with a lantern. He keeps its flame cupped with one palm against the breeze that slides down from the roofs. His cloak smells faintly of smoke and rain. His boots know every hidden dip in the worn stair. He touches the oak door as one greets an old friend and fits the iron key into its familiar bite. The tower receives him with a soft groan as it opens, stone waking to the day's first footfalls. Inside, the tower air is cool and smells of dust, damp lime, and old rope. The lantern glow finds motes that drift like slow snow, stirring as the door closes. A narrow stair curls upward against the wall, its treads cupped by centuries. Aldrich begins to climb. His left hand knows each stone of the central pier. His right hand keeps the lantern steady. The sound in the stairwell is his breathing, the leather whisper of his cloak, and once, far above, the small iron shiver of a bell settling in its sleep. At the first landing he pauses, to set the lantern on a niche and lift a shutter. A thin square of damp blue morning leans into the tower. From here he can see the thatch of the alewife's house, beaded with dew, and the long dark line of the river beyond the bridge. He listens. Somewhere a baker's boy rattles a bucket. Somewhere a dog shakes off the night. The town is stirring, and the hour must be told. He climbs again, passing the clock room where a wooden face and iron hands will later mark the noon. The mechanism hums faintly even at this hour, a patient tick that belongs as much to the tower as the sparrows in its eaves. Aldrich glances at the balance, sets a small weight with 2 practiced turns of the screw, and moves on. Higher, the stair opens to the chamber of ropes, and from the darkness there breathes the dry, clean smell of hemp. Here hang the bell ropes, each threaded through the floor to the loft above. They are thick as a wrist at the base, furred smooth by palms, each finished with a woolly sally plaited in colored yarn to tell it from its neighbors. Aldrich touches them one by one as if greeting a small company. St. Michael's deep tongue, the mid-bell for work hours, the quick little angel bell that runs ahead of the rest. He takes his place, feet set, breath measured, and wraps his hands around the first rope. The first pull is a conversation with weight. The rope yields and then tugs back, and above wood and iron begin their slow swing. The tower hears this before the town does. Its stones take the tremor like a heartbeat. On the second pull, a sound gathers down the rope, rise of a note not yet born, and then, with the third, the bell finds its voice. The hour strikes, 1, then 2, then 3, slow and round, rolling over rooftops like warm bread sent from an oven. Bells speak in more than numbers. Aldrich knows the measure for feast days, the urgency for fire, the long sorrow for a funeral when every stroke falls with the weight of a name. He knows the merry peal for a wedding when all the ropes are given to willing hands and the chamber shakes with joy. But the dawn hour is a simple speech. Be steady, be ready, take up the work the day brings. The bell's sound travels down lanes, along the river, and out across ploughland just greening under the sky. When the last resonance breaks against the tower walls and slides into silence, Aldrich coils the rope neatly at his feet and lifts his lantern again. His hands have the faint burn of hemp in them and smell of dust and wool. He climbs one level higher to the bell loft, pushing open a door that sticks when the wood swells with mist. The loft air is colder. Pigeons have left a few white signatures in awkward corners, and a swath of feathers tells of a hawk's swift visit last week. The bells hang like sleeping animals, their bellies dark and glossed in places by fingers and weather. Aldrich runs a hand along the lip of the great bell and feels the shallow nicks of long ago repairs the low seam where the founder's skill turned molten metal into voice. He checks the clapper straps, the wooden headstocks, the pins where iron meets oak, a drop of oil on a pivot, a twist of cord where a fray begins, small attentions that keep the bells honest. In the open shutters daylight grows, showing a pale east and roofs like wet scales. He steps out onto the narrow gallery that rings the loft, one hand on the rail. Here the town lies open like a child asleep. Chimney smoke no more than smudges, the Guildhall roof silver with dew, the square holding its breath before feet and hooves claim it. Downriver the mill wheel is still. Upriver a field shows lines laid for spring sowing, a pattern only the height reveals. Aldrich breathes the cold and lets his gaze rest in each quarter before returning to his task. When wind comes, it lives here first. It threads the shutters and combs the rope tails and sets the tower to a faint, unthreatening hum. On winter nights it can make the bells mutter, though they do not move. Aldrich, who has climbed in storms and in the thick hush of snow, listens to wind with respect. He has known a jolt of lightning to drum through the stone and make the farthest windows jump. He has known warm summer air that lifted swallows through the arches and set them to season-long conversations with the bells. Below the loft, in the room with narrow slit for light, sits the tower's small store. Lumps of tallow, coils of spare cord, 2 wedges for the headstocks, a basket with rags, a bit of beeswax for a stubborn pin. A shelf holds a book that keeps the bell ledger, names of ringers, the occasions, the times when weather required a change. Aldrich's script slopes like a hillside, steady and brown. He adds the morning entry with a stub of quill, blowing on the line where the ink pools. As the town wakes, so too does the stair. Footsteps will come later. The sacristan with candles to place before the morning office, the priest climbing with him sometimes to look upon the roofs and the weather. On holy days, boys come to pull the small angel bell in patterns they learn by laughter and correction. 2 strokes and rest, 3 and swing. Careful now, mind your hands. For now the tower is Aldrich's alone, and he takes the quiet as a gift. He goes down to the halfway landing where a little window shows the lane behind the chantry. A cat sits on a barrel, washing its face with solemn gravity. A woman opens her door and shakes a cloth into the weak sun. Steam lifts in threads from her pail. Aldrich smiles at these small signs and descends to the ringing floor for the next duty of the morning. The work bell that tells the craftsman the hour is turned. This one is brisker, a pattern that runs like a quick messenger through the streets. At the rope he sets his feet and gives the pull its spring. The mid-bell answers with a cheerful round note, lighter than the hour bell but with a soft belly to it. Aldrich shapes it into the known call, quick, quick, pause, quick, pause beat that sends shutters opening and doors unbarred. He can almost see the life it wakes, the smith lifting his hammer to its first strike, the weaver's shuttle taking up its dance, the potter setting a hand steady on the wheel. When the pattern finishes, the bell's last smile lingers in the dust and slips away. He takes his bread on the stair, a coarse heel split and rubbed with a crumb of cheese, saved from last night, eaten standing with his shoulder against stone. He chews slowly, listening for what the tower tells him. A change in the small tick of the clock's gut string, a rope that sings a little sharper where it rubs. He feels the day settling into its course. The lantern on the niche burns low and he pinches it out, trusting morning to finish the light. By mid-morning, the sun finds the east face of the tower and warms the stone to a faint sweetness. Aldrich opens the higher shutters to give the chamber air. He uncoils a rope and lets it lie in loose loops to ease the twist it has held since winter's wet. He tests the clappers by hand, moving each only an inch, feeling the weight his arms know so well. A lark, a mad fool of a creature, wheels up from the square to peep at the strange dark mouths and then skirls away, leaving a feather caught on a splinter of rail. He frees it and tucks it under the ledger's cover. Below, the square is no longer empty. A girl whose hair plait shines like new straw rushes with a basket toward the baker. An old man carries a stool under his arm and sets himself at the well to tell the day's first stories to any who will listen. A pair of merchants measure each other with eyes polite and cold. Aldrich, who has never been much for bargaining, feels grateful for a life where the day's measure is made in sound. When noon comes, it comes with promise of meat steaming in kitchens and of rest. Aldrich takes the great rope of St. Michael once more. He draws breath and gives the bell its 12. Between each stroke he lets the sound finish its travel, counting in the slow space where the town breathes. In far streets people lift their heads to hear how far the hour has gone. In the fields men stand straight and look toward the tower, though they cannot see it. After the 12th, the air holds a moment of fullness like the top of a hill, and then slips downhill toward afternoon. Visitors sometimes climb at noon when the sacristan allows. Today, 2 children with round eyes step carefully behind their mother onto the gallery. Aldrich keeps them close, shows them the ropes, not to touch. Mine names the bells as if introducing old friends. The children whisper, and their breath makes small ghosts in the cool. He tells them, because they have asked, that the bells tasted the sky in a storm long ago and rang themselves without a hand. He tells them he once watched a flock of swifts turn all at once in the bell's echo and vanish like thrown soot. They stare into the mouth of St. Michael with reverence. Afternoon lays a hand of warmth on the stone. The clock ticks its steady thread, and Aldrich mends a splice where the rope has grown thin. He works with a sailor's patience, unlay, lay, twist, smooth, wax. He ties a stopper knot at the end where careless hands might have lost it. He oils a pinion in the clock with a drop barely visible, then wipes away the extra, because too much kindness can be its own harm. He rests with his back to the pier and lets the tower's faint hum climb into his bones. If rain comes, he will close the shutters and the world will go soft and near. If wind comes, he will listen to the whale song in the arches and remember the winter of deep snows when he had to climb every hour to knock ice from the bell's lips. Today is temperate. The sparrows peck at lime crumbs by the sill and scold him as if the tower were theirs. Aldrich's mouth remembers a psalm, and he hums a line without thinking, and the tower takes the tune and holds it like a secret. Late in the day, a small procession below catches his eye, a bier with a single white cloth, 2 candles, 4 slow men. The priest's voice carries only as far as the square's edge, but Aldrich knows the shape of those words. He descend. In the rope chamber he takes the mourning rope wrapped thicker to speak more gently, and draws the bell 3 times slow, 3 times slow, 3 times slow. The sound falls like steady rain. Women in doorways bow their heads, men pull caps low. The tower becomes a throat for the town's sorrow, and Aldrich is careful with the weight of it. When the bier has passed, he hangs the rope back in its place and stands a moment with his hand resting on the woolen grip. He has a small pouch of salt and a heel of bread in his pocket. He eats, thinking of evenings when grief recedes to the edges of rooms but never quite leaves. Slowly the tower room warms again to the ordinary. Distant laughter reaches him from the tavern door as someone opens it for a breath. The scent of stew coys of a lane and is lost. Vespers' bell belongs more to the priest than to the town, but Aldrich loves it too. Its pattern is patient and thoughtful. He climbs once more as the west reddens. Shadows of the bell braces stretch long across the planks. The rope fur brushes his knuckles. He rings in the measured speech that tells the church to gather and tells the streets that day is folding itself away. Even those who do not go to prayer tidy their stalls and turn their feet homeward when they hear it. At last the day's work thins to small tasks. He checks again the clock's great weight and sets its pall to the next fall. He folds 2 sackcloths, brushes a line of dust from a sill, writes a last note in the ledger about the splice. He sweeps a few pigeon feathers toward a corner so he may carry them down in the morning. The bell ropes hang resting now, their tails like sleepy cattle in a byre. Dusk fills the stair and the gallery windows dim to pewter. Down in the lanes voices are fewer. The candlelight in windows walks the walls like tame fire. Aldrich stands on the gallery and takes the town in once more. The miller's boy fetching water, the cooper's yard with hoops stacked like moons, the bridge holding its stone breath over the river's last gleam. He lifts his cap in an old habit no one taught him and no one sees. Curfew is the last duty, and it carries a different weight from morning's call. It says not wake but rest. Aldrich takes the rope of the great bell and draws the slow wind strokes, leaving room between for the sound to find every tucked away place. Cat's paws, ears pricked. A child turns in his bed and lets go the day's last fret. A woman at a hearth eases her hands from the dough and sets the lid on for morning's rise. The bell speaks, and the town answers with shutters and latches, with banked fires and quieter breath. When the sound has gone as far as it can and faded beyond his hearing, Aldrich coils the rope for the night. He descends by lantern light once more, hand on stone, feet sure as always. At the door he sets the iron bar and checks it twice, then blows the lantern out so the tower's dark may be complete. Outside, the square is a map of small islands of flame and small pools of dark. The tower stands behind him like a resting animal. He walks home by the lane that smells of old wood and damp lime. Those he passes lift a hand, and he lifts his. No one speaks loudly. The day has been said and answered, and night now is a cup to drink from quietly. Aldrich thinks of the bells above him in their nests of oak and iron, the ropes sleeping, the clock's heart taking its careful, invisible steps toward midnight. In his small room he eats a stew warmed on coals and a heel of bread with a scrape of fat. He washes his hands in a bowl and looks at the faint red burns the rope left in his palms, the little hairs of hemp caught like yellow threads. He rubs a smear of beeswax into the skin, and it eases. He lies down, hearing in the bone of his head the memory of the day's notes strung like beads. Dawn, work, noon, sorrow, prayer, rest. When sleep takes him, it is with the sense of height and air and the steady companionship of stone. The tower holds the town and is held by it in return. Tomorrow, Aldrich will wake and climb, and the bells will speak again as they always have, voices of metal and wood and wind carrying through lanes, across water and into fields, telling of I and of belonging. For now the night closes around the tower and the town alike, and all things are measured by the slow, kind silence between the strokes. Though lords and kings ruled from castles and cities, most medieval villages lived day to day with little direct oversight. Yet even the smallest community needed someone to keep order, to guard against thieves, settle quarrels, and call help when danger came. In many places this work fell to the village watch and the sometimes distant but powerful sheriff. Together they formed the first thin line of law in a world where roads were lonely and justice slow. In a typical hamlet, the watch was no polished guard. It was a duty rotated among able-bodied men, sometimes chosen at the village moot, sometimes by lot. Each night 2 or 3 would rise from bed, wrap cloaks against damp, and take lantern and staff to patrol lanes. They checked barns, watched gates if there were any, and listened for trouble, a dog barking wildly, a stranger creeping near, fire crackling where it shouldn't. Their weapons were simple, stout cudgel or billhook, perhaps a horn to sound alarm. Some villages owned an old crossbow or pike kept in church porch. Armor was rare. A thick cloak and courage were more common. Yet the watch mattered, for most homes were timber and thatch. One spark could destroy all. They also kept eyes out for raiders, runaway serfs or outlaws slipping through woods. By day, the roll often passed to the constable or reeve, an elected or appointed man who kept lists of duties, carried messages, and acted as first voice of law. He might chase debtors, break butt fights at alehouse, and bring accused before Lord's Manor Court. His badge was often a staff tipped with iron or a simple seal ring showing authority. Though humble, the constable's word carried weight. To defy him risked fine or worse. Above these local figures stood the sheriff, the king's or lord's chief officer of a shire or county. Unlike the rotating watch, the sheriff was a permanent, powerful man, often of noble birth. He collected taxes, called out militias, hunted criminals, and enforced royal writs. Villagers seldom saw him except when serious crime or royal order reached their door. His men, the bailiffs, might ride in with warrants or demands for levy and impress everyone with bright livery and hard tone. When theft or violence occurred, the village watch raised hue and cry. A horn or shout summoned neighbors. By law, all able men had to join chase. Together they followed tracks into fields or woods, torches flaring, dogs baying. If they caught culprit, he was bound, often with rope or chained in stocks until reeve or sheriff's man could judge. If he escaped, watch kept signs, broken hedge, dropped shoe, direction of flight, to report later. Justice itself was slow and local. For small quarrels, stray pig-eating cabbages, drunken brawl, the manor court or village moot settled with fines or public apology. The reeve kept record, lord or steward presided. Greater crimes, murder, armed theft, treason called the sheriff. He might summon jury of neighbors, hold inquest, and send prisoner to larger gaol. Punishments ranged from stocks and whipping to hanging at shire gallows. Night patrol brought its own fears. Watchmen walked muddy tracks with flickering lanterns, hearing every rustle magnified by dark. Wind turned hedges to whispering shapes. Owls startled with sudden cry. Yet most nights were quiet. Dogs barked, lovers met secretly, fox raided henhouse. Still the thought of outlaw bands, real or imagined, kept men alert. Tales told by hearth often grew from watchmen's long walks. Festivals altered duties. On feast nights when ale flowed, watch kept peace, gently guiding drunken dancers home or breaking fights. During fairs they checked stalls for theft and ensured tolls paid. Fires from bonfires or lanterns worried them most. One spark could leap to roof and consume whole street. Bells stood ready to call bucket chain if blaze began. Religion touched this work. Watchmen might carry blessed candle or relic against evil. Reeves swore oaths on gospel. Rogation processions circled fields and paths each spring, blessing boundary markers that also served as patrol points. Priests sometimes joined chase of thief, ringing handbell to rally help. Sheriff's visits were memorable. Trumpets and livery signaled his arrival. His mounted men inspected roads, read royal writ aloud, or seized goods for tax. Villagers grumbled but obeyed. Sometimes a wanted man was dragged away in irons. Sometimes fair, held under his license, brought brief prosperity. Though feared, sheriff also symbolized link to larger realm, proof the king's peace reached even tiny hamlet. Economy shaped safety. Prosperous villages might hire permanent guard or build stout gate. Poor ones relied on mutual aid. Inns at crossroads posted their own watch to protect travelers. Markets attracted both buyers and pickpockets. Constables kept wary eye. Tithes and tolls funded repairs of stocks, gallows, or bridges to chase criminals. Season changed danger. Winter nights were long and dark. Thieves and hungry wolves alike prowled. Spring fairs tempted pickpockets. Summer brought wandering laborers after harvest, some honest, some not. Autumn meant moving grain and taxes, good loot for bandits. Watch kept eyes sharp and horns near. Despite hardship, service carried honor. A good watchman was trusted neighbor. A firm but fair reeve might keep peace better than distant lord. Songs praised brave constables who caught notorious thieves. Communities valued those who stood guard while others slept. At dawn, watch ended. Men returned lanterns, banked fire at meeting point, and went home weary but safe. Life resumed, fields, forge, and kitchen filled with sound. Yet every household knew the night's quiet owed much to those few who walked dark lanes with staff and courage. So picture medieval law not as vast police, but as humble network, lanterns bobbing through fog, neighbors answering horn reeve with ledger, sheriff's men thundering in when stakes rose. The village watch and the sheriff held fragile order, enough to keep fear at bay until sunrise lit fields once more. Before the day's trade has fully swelled, when stalls are only half raised and the smell of fresh bread still drifts soft along the cobbles, a bell sounds from the Guildhall door. It is this the church bell for prayer, nor the curfew that will come at dusk. This bell call folk to the market court, the small regular justice that keeps a town's everyday life from unraveling. Men and women look up from crates and counters, a few drift toward the hall, a pair of beadles clear a path with their staves. The law today is it the distant thunder of a king's decree, but the steady tread of neighbors meeting to set things straight. The Guildhall smells of beeswax and old wood. Its long room is lit by narrow windows that catch slants of pale gold. Rushes crackle faintly underfoot. At the far end, beneath a painted board showing the town's arms, the portreeve or bailiff takes his place, flanked by aldermen in furred hoods. A clerk sits with ink and quill, a little knife for trimming the nib. On the table lie the town's measures, a standard loaf, a brass ell for cloth, nested cups for ale, and, more solemn still, a small chest with a seal and charters. This is a chamber of weighing, not only of goods, but of words. People gather slowly, drawn by duty or curiosity. The ale taster stands ready. The bread weigher fingers his iron balance. Two beadles linger by the door with lanterns and staves, their faces serious but not unkind. A fishmonger whispering with her daughter steals a glance across the room to the butcher she has quarreled with all week. A tanner, still faint with the perfume of his trade, ties back his sleeves. A weaver, hand scarred by loom strings, shifts from foot to foot and tries not to meet the glance of the dye merchant, whose madder, he says, arrived watered. The clerk calls the first matter in a voice trained by years of reading charters in chilly rooms. A baker is brought forward by the eedle, his cap in his hands. The summer has been dry. Flour dear, loaves have crept a little smaller, and the town grows hungry and cross. Today we will see if his bread rings true. The standard loaf is set on the table, the baker's loaf beside it. The balance swings. You can hear breathing, the soft tap of the clerk's knife on the board, the distant cry of a hawker in the square. The scale settles, the loaf is light. Words come then, careful as a mason's line. The baker pleads that the miller has taken too much toll, that the river ran low and the grinding failed, that he will mend. The ale taster lifts a brow. The beadles fold their arms. The aldermen exchange glances. The law here is as blind. It has eyes full of fields and weather. The portreeve weighs excuse against custom and decides on a fine light enough not to ruin, heavy enough to be felt. The baker bows, his shame no less keen for being shared among neighbors. The clerk writes a neat line in the roll. The town exhales. Next comes a dispute of measures. A clothier claims the mercer sold him 3 ells that were 2 and a hand. The mercer insists the board was true and the line straight. The brass ell is brought forth, its edge smooth from generations of fingers. They set the cloth, they mark, they measure again. It falls short by the width of a child's thumb. A murmur runs like a small wind among those watching. The mercer flushes dark, he speaks fast and hot. The portreeve stills him with a lifted hand. It is not ruin the court intends, on the straightening of crooked things. Restitution is ordered, a promise taken for honest measure henceforth. The mercer nods, chastened. Then the matters grow smaller and oddly intimate, as if the town were turning out its pockets. A neighbor's pigs have rooted a kitchen garden. The owner swears his boy latched the gate, and perhaps he did, poorly. A washerwoman has hung her linens on a line stretched across a lane and tangled a cart. A journeyman has shouted insults at a rival outside the church porch. Each case is called, spoken, weighed. The court moves like a slow river over stones, finding the course that will keep peace without flooding fields. Fines are set, apologies demanded, promises written. The clerk's quill scratches and scratches, the sound like a cricket in summer reeds. Between each matter, you can sense how custom girds these walls. No statute book lies fat and oracular, rather memory circulates like warm air. As our fathers did, says an alderman, and a woman at the back nods because she remembers too, when she was a girl and stood here with a basket of onions to testify about a borrowed scale. The portreeve quotes last year's ruling on the ale pots. The ale taster reminds them of Candlemas when the Lord High Steward passed through and blessed their measures. This is it, the roaring assize of a travelling judge, not the iron justice of kings. It is a daily stitching of rents and tears. The door opens and a stranger is led in, a peddler with a pack of pins and ribbons, boots muddy from 3 counties' roads. He has been accused of selling underweight thread and quarrelling with a guildsman who says such wares may be sold only by freemen of the town. The guild's warden speaks, his sash bright, his beard trimmed short. The peddler replies with a cracked but steady voice, laying out the truth of mileposts, ferry tolls, and what he paid at the last fair. The court hears not only law now, but the breath of the wider world. The portreeve grants him leave to sell for the day, under the eye of the beadles, with warning to seek proper license if he would linger. The guildman bows to the seal rather than the man. The peddler bows to all and goes out lighter than he came. Sometimes the market court steps in to stop a quarrel before it grows teeth. Today, two butchers stand shoulder to shoulder, flushed with the heat of their own pride, arguing over whose stall edges the shade and whose flies plague the other's table. They are big men with hands that know knives. The beadles watch with care. The portreeve listens, then orders a chalk line drawn on the cobbles and a change of places on alternate days until the weather turns. It is a simple solution, almost childish, and it works like cool water. The butchers scowl, then start to grin, then groan at themselves for being made boys again before their own apprentices. The court smiles in its beard. A pair of friars enter, sandals wet, robes dusty from the road. They have come to ask that the market cross be repaired. Pilgrims trip on its steps. A loose stone shook out under the last preacher and gave him a fright. The aldermen nod. The town is a body. If the knee fails, the back suffers. The bailiff assigns masons to the task and sets aside a little from the last levy on wine. The clerk writes a neat note for the mason's lodge, and one of the friars, who sings plain chants sweeter than a thrush, hums something gentle as he thanks them. The Guildhall softens, for song is an old cousin of justice. Toward midday, a case arrives like a stone dropped in still water. The watch has brought in a man who drew a knife at the alehouse the night before. No blood was spilled. His friends dragged him out. The horn was never blown. Yet knives and ale are bad kin, and the town remembers other summers when such matters grew sharp and would not be sheathed. The man stands with his cap crushed in his hands. He is it hardened. He is only foolish, and his fear prickles the air like nettles. The portree's face turns grave. The market court is it a gallows, but it is a toy. Testimony comes in like beads on a string. The alewife, the carter, a boy who saw the quarrel through the half door. The man's shame deepens with each telling, and at last his shoulders fold. He begs forgiveness of the alewife. He swears on the cross to leave his knife at home on market days. The fine is fair, the warning firm. A second offense will go to the town prison below the hall where damp stones keep bad company. The man bows so low his cap brushes the rushes. When he straightens, the net of the town has caught him and set him gently back on the bank instead of letting him drift into deep water. Between matters, you notice small rituals that thread sense into the morning. The clerk sanding fresh ink with fine dust. The beadle tipping a cup of water to a sickly witness. The alderman checking the brass L once more with the same tenderness. A priest shows a relic. A child peeks around her mother's skirts. The portreeve pretend not to see, then lets the brass cup pass into her fingers for a moment. She weighs it solemnly, mouth round with duty, and the whole hall smiles as if the town itself had briefly worn that little face. Occasionally the court brushes the edge of higher law. A letter with a green seal arrives from the sheriff, ordering that a certain trader be watched for smuggling wine from the bishop's port to the Lord's manor. The portreeve receives it with due respect, but he sets it beside the basket of onions and the complaint about a blocked lane. because for the town each matter sits in the same scale, how to live near one another without making life a wound. The clerk copies the letter carefully into the book and sends word to the watch captain to keep a quiet eye. At last the assize of bread and ale is called for the week. The ale taster strides forth, a man with a careful palate and a gift for surviving a great many sips before prime. He tastes from 3 jugs set out by the alewives, each cupped by its own small brand. He smacks his lips, he nods, he shakes his head at one that runs thin as river water. The alewife protests, grain dear, heat fierce, but the rule is steady as the bell. A fine, a warning, and a promise taken. Then the bread weigher lifts each loaf, and the scales speak in quiet tilts and clicks. When all is done, the clerk declares the week's prices. In the square beyond the door, the news runs through the crowd like a fresh, cool stream. Near the end, a matter of the lane is brought, a cartload of timber left 3 days running outside a carpenter's shop, blocking delivery to the baker's back door. The bread will be late because the boards are lazy, says an alderman not unkindly, and the hall laughs because truth be simple and still need say. The carpenter nods, promises to stack farther within his yard. The baker promises to shout less and speak first. It seems a small thing, but wheels are small things, and they turn a city. The clerk reads out the fines and payments due. The beadle collects a few coins. The portreeve marks the day closed with a rap on the table. Before the people drift away, the bailiff asks in a voice unadorned if any have other pleas, for sometimes the last thing said is the most important. An old widow steps forward then, thin as a straw, eyes bright with resolve. Her rent, she says, was raised beyond what the last charter allows. She has brought the paper, folded soft as linen from much handling. The aldermen lean in, the clerk smooths the page, the seal winks its waxy eye. Quiet settles like a cloth. There is a pause you can feel in your bones, the space where law climbs down from the rafters and sits at the same table as hunger. The portreeve asks 3 questions. Lit more. Who set the new rent? What counsel was taken? What custom stands? The widow answers plainly. She does not ask for mercy, no for measure. At last the portreeve nods to the clerk, who writes an order that the rent to set back until assize day, when the travelling justices ride through, and that meanwhile the reeve of the ward shall look in on the widow's roof and see what repairs must be done before winter. You can hear the whole town breathe again, not loudly, not with cheer, but with that quiet assent people make when they know something has been kept whole. When the session ends, the room does not empty at once. People mill softly. The baker pays, the mercer and clothier check the brass L one more tie with rueful grins. The butchers, newly chastened, speak of sharing a cask of ale and moving the chalk line by mutual agreement if the sun grows cruel. The peddler shoulders his pack. The friars depart in a drift of hymn. The widow folds the charter and tucks it beneath her cloak, as if she were tucking in a child. The beetles set the standard measures back in their chest with the same care a mason uses for his best chisel. Outside, the square has grown loud. Stalls stand fully dressed. Geese complain in wicker prisons. A boy runs, pursued by a dog certain of biscuits. The market court has made its decisions, and the town rejoins itself without fuss, as a bone knits under a poultice. A bell rings again, this time from the church, not for law but for prayer, and for a moment the two bells mingle, secular and sacred, and the town stands where it always does, in the meeting of many duties under one sky. By afternoon, the clerk will sand the wet lines in his book and close it with a sigh familiar as the closing of a window. The portreeve will drink a cup of watered wine and go out to look at the line between the butcher's stalls, a little amused at his own handiwork. The beadles will carry news to the wardens. The baker will weigh his dough with a care he sometimes forgets when the morning rush bites. Nothing grand has happened here, and yet the town lives by such mornings as a body lives by bread. In the evening, when the sun has gone and the lanterns glow in the lanes, people will retell some matters with more wit than truth. The mercer will become a scoundrel, the butchers buffoons, the friar a saint with a voice like honey. In a week the sting will be gone and the lesson will remain, as lessons do when they are wrapped in laughter. The widow will sleep easier, not because the law is a cudgel, but because it is a staff that helps her walk. So remember this room when you picture medieval justice, not only the gallows on the hill or the distant thunder of royal writs, but this market court where neighbors measure bread and measure words, where a brass L and a steady pen keep peace, where the law bends just enough to hold, like a willow switch woven into a fence. Here, under beams dark with smoke and banners faded by pine, a town learns again each market day how to live together and call it fair. Step away from the noisy square and follow a narrow lane lined with timbered houses and small workshops. At its end stands a heavier, prouder building, the Guildhall. Here, behind carved doors and tall windows, the lifeblood of the medieval town is organized, protected, and celebrated. For the craftsman or merchant, this isn't just an office. It is the beating heart of trade, honor, and shared fate. The Guildhall shape depends on wealth, but always it shows quiet authority. In some towns it is stone, with arched entry and carved shield showing tools of the trade, a shoemaker's knife, a weaver's shuttle, a hammer and tongs. In others it is timber frame yet grand, with wide porch where notices are nailed and deals struck in shadow of its roof. Flags may flutter bearing guild emblem, a painted wheel, a golden key, or simple initials. Step inside and smell polish, wool, beeswax, and old smoke. The hall is long and high, rafters dark with age. Benches line walls, a raised dais holds great chair for guildmaster. Windows are few but high, Light falls in bars across plank floor. Shields, banners, or painted boards proclaim the craft's history. Perhaps a carved chest stands near, heavy with charters and precious seal that marks all official business. This space, is it idle? It is courtroom, school, feast hall, and bank all in one. Here apprentices are sworn, masters examined, disputes judged, prices fixed. The guild keeps measures honest, a standard loaf, an official ell for cloth, a marked weight for spice or metal. To cheat these is to risk fine or expulsion. On ordinary mornings, clerks sit at table copying accounts or charters. Journeymen arrive to pay dues. Masters bring complaints or proposals. The air hums with talk of trade. Which dye merchant has best madder? Which road's unsafe? Who has invented clever loom or safer lock? Decisions ripple outward to every shop and stall. When an apprentice is bound to a master, ceremony happens here. The boy, sometimes girl, kneels or bows. Parents pay small fee and promise obedience. Guild master blesses tools, needle, plane, knife. Oaths sworn to work hard, keep secrets, respect craft. Records inked into thick register. From that day, child belongs to this brotherhood. Years later, the same hall sees masterpiece judged. Journeyman presents work, shoe without flaw, chest with perfect joinery, cloth evenly woven, lock cunningly made. Elders lean close, measuring, tapping, murmuring. If approved, journeyman becomes master, free to open own shop and take apprentices. It is a moment of pride, often followed by feast. Discipline too plays out here. If baker cheats on weight, if tanner pollutes stream, if locksmith sells secrets, he may be fined, shamed, or barred. Stocks may stand outside door, sometimes offender must parade through square. Honor matters, for guild reputation binds all members together. Feasting transforms hall. Long tables set with bread, cheese, roasted meat, barrels of ale or wine tapped, candles lit in iron chandeliers. Songs of the craft echo under rafters, sometimes solemn, sometimes merry with fiddles and pipes. On Saints' Feast, often the patron of the trade, Mass said first, then procession through streets with banners, then great meal. Here masters advise younger men, marriages arranged, alliances forged. Guild charity shines too. Chests hold funds to aid widows, care for sick, bury dead. When fire ruins a workshop, guild may rebuild. When member jailed unjustly, they may pay bail or plead case. Orphans of masters might be apprenticed to others free of charge. Through guild, craft becomes family beyond blood. Wider power stirs here as well. Guilds lobby town council, influencing laws on tolls or market rights. Wealthy guilds lend money to princes or bishops. Some raise militias when city threatened. Their banners to decide politics. Their masters may serve as mayors. Beneath humble tools lies quiet might. Education blooms under guild roof. Young members taught not only craft, but letters, numbers, and law. Some halls keep small libraries of trade secrets, pattern books, or foreign weights. Travelers returning from fairs share tales of distant fashion and invention, widening every ear's horizon. The Guildhall is also a sanctuary of pride, tools polished and displayed, great seals guarded, charters treasured as proof of rights won against lords or kings. Here artisans remember they are not serfs but skilled men and women whose labor shapes towns' wealth. Festivals parade this pride with banners and embroidered hoods, each trade marching behind its master to church and back, drums and trumpets sounding. At night the hall grows quiet but not lifeless. Lamps burn low while clerks tally accounts, watchmen pace outside. Sometimes secret council meets to plan price rises or defend against rival guild. Sometimes a poor craftsman sleeps by fire after a long journey, safe under brotherhood's roof. When you think of medieval city, think not only of lord's castle or bishop's palace, but of this guild hall, sturdy, busy, proud. Here ordinary hands found strength in unity. Here craft became power. Here a town's very identity was forged, one oath, one masterpiece, one shared meal at a die. If the market court is the quiet stitching of a town's peace, the pillory is its sharp needle, public, humbling, and meant to mend what has torn. It stands often at the edge of the square or near the churchyard gate, a stout wooden frame with holes for head and hands, or sometimes only for the neck. Its presence is reminder and warning, but also strangely communal. To stand there is shame, to watch is lesson. To pass by is to weigh one's own conduct. The structure is simple. 2 uprights of timber, weathered by rain and sun, support a hinged board drilled with 3 round openings, 1 for the head, 2 for arms. Iron fittings hold it shut. A padlock or pin secures it. Some towns have stocks instead, holes for feet, leaving the punished seated. Some have cucking stools to duck scolds in water, but the pillory, tall and central, is most feared. Morning is the usual hour for penance, after the market court has judged or after proclamation from bailiff. The culprit is led out by beadles or watchmen. He or she may be baker who cheated weight, fishwife who sold rotten herring, drunkard who drew knife, slanderer who loosed tongue too far. Nobles rarely stand here. This is justice for townsfolk and tradesmen. The walk is part of punishment. Beadles carry their staves. Sometimes a small crowd follows, curious or jeering. The condemned may wear placard naming offense, measure, scold, drunkard, thief. Bells sometimes toll. At the square the boards creak open. The head goes in first, then hands. When they close, there is sudden stillness. A person bound and lifted above everyday pace, no longer hidden among neighbors. Shame is the chief tool. People pause at stalls to look. Some laugh or toss jeers. Children point, friends avert eyes. Yet cruelty is it always the aim? Many watchers remain quiet, some is sympathetic. It is expected to feel chastened but not broken. The sentence may last an hour or until the market bell rings, rarely more than a day. Too long would be seen as harsh and risk pity turning to anger. Still, humiliation can sting worse than whip. A proud tradesman feels weight of every stare. A gossip feels own words flung back. Some weep, some stand stiff and silent, some joke to show spirit. Once in while a friend slips cup of ale to lips or pats shoulder. The town is it mob alone. It is many hearts weighing justice as they pass. Mischief sometimes creeps in. Children throw soft clods or overripe fruit. Apprentices shout jests. In hard towns stones may fly, though beetles forbid it. Law wants spectacle, not maiming. A adel's staff or steward's glare could hush rowdy crowd quickly. The boundary between lesson and cruelty is watched, if unevenly. Some penances take ritual form. A scold woman or man too quick of tongue might stand holding heavy stone or wearing paper crown of shame. A cheating merchant might display false weights hung about his neck. A brawler may hold broken knife blade upright as warning. Occasionally offenders forced to cry out confession aloud. I sold short measure, I struck in anger, I lied before the court. The words linger like smoke above the square. Church and town sometimes mingle here. On holy days, offenders may be brought after Mass to kneel and beg pardon before congregation. A penitent might wear sackcloth, carry candle, or process barefoot around church while choir sings a psalm. Such public penance seeks not only to punish, but to heal, to bring sinner back inside walls of grace. The curfew bell marks end of many sentences. Beadles unlock pillory, ease aching limbs free. Some punished hurry off, some pause to bow or cross themselves. Friends may gather quietly, shielding from lingering stares. It is strange mixture, humiliation and relief, rebirth of ordinary life after being spectacle. Despite its severity, townspeople often view pillory as practical mercy. It is cheaper than prison, swifter than long trial, less brutal than whipping or hanging. A day of shame to save a man's trade if he learns, a warning without ruin, and the visible nature of it keeps law transparent. All and see who judged, who punished, and why. Seasons alter the scene. In summer, bright sun glares on sweating face, but warmth softens long wait. Winter is hardest. Cold bites wrists and neck. Snow or rain soaks clothes, and crowd sympathy may grow. On feast days, crowds larger and more vocal. During Lent, silence heavier with reflection. Night punishments rare, justice seeks daylight's gaze. Children remember these events vividly. A boy watching father's rival in pillory may learn measure of honesty. A girl seeing loudmouthed neighbor shamed may think twice before echoing gossip. The memory sticks, shaping next generation's sense of fairness more than distant laws ever could. Yet the system can be bent. Wealthy merchants sometimes pay fine to avoid public shame. Guild masters shield their own. Some poor souls suffer while rich offenders slip away. Murmurs rise when this grows too obvious. Town pride rests on idea that Pillory stands for all. A wise portreeve knows to balance mercy and equity, lest trust erode. Faith lingers after punishment ends. Many walk straight from pillory to church door, kneel and whisper prayer for strength to mend life. Priests sometimes greet them with quiet absolution, for shame is heavy but not meant to damn. The goal, however imperfectly met, is to reintegrate, to send neighbor home sobered, not destroyed. At dusk, when stalls fold and geese quiet, the empty pillory stands in square's corner like a silent sentinel. Children climb on it when no one minds, playing justice games. Lovers carve initials in its posts. Travelers glance and know this town keeps its own peace. The wood is worn smooth where countless hands have rested, heads bowed or lifted in stubborn pride. Think of it as barbarity alone, but as mirror of a close-knit world. A wrong there ripples through streets like water. Setting it right needs more than parchment. The pillory and public penance are raw and human, imperfect, sometimes cruel, but aiming to remind rather than destroy. In them we glimpse a society holding itself accountable with the tools it has. So when you picture medieval law, do not stop at royal writ or far-off gallows. See the town square, wood dark with rain, bell calling neighbors, offender standing humble while life flows on. Around them weave judgment, mercy, laughter, gossip, and eventual return. It is hard medicine, but meant to heal the body of the town. Every world of order has its shadow, and in the Middle Ages that shadow often took shape as the Gaol, or in a castle, the dungeon. These were not yet the organized prisons of later centuries. They were holding places, grim and practical, where law kept the accused or the condemned until judgment came. To step into one was to enter a space built less for comfort than for control, yet it also revealed much about how medieval people understood crime, punishment, and mercy. In a town, the Gaol might stand beside the Guildhall or under the sheriff's court. It was a stone room or cellar with iron-barred door, sometimes a whole tower given to justice. In villages, the holding cell might be no more than a lock-up near church or a strong room in Reeve's house. In castles, the dungeon lay deep, vaulted chambers beneath thick walls, sometimes reached only by narrow stair or trapdoor. Cold seeped from stone, air smelled of damp and straw. Torchlight flickered on iron rings set into walls. Gaolers, keepers of these spaces, were practical folk. Some were old soldiers, others trusted servants of lord or sheriff. They lived above or near cells, keeping keys on heavy ring. Their work mixed routine and vigilance, feeding prisoners, cleaning when forced, preventing escape. Payment was often poor. Gaolers sometimes charged inmates for straw, better food, or looser fetters. Rich prisoners might buy relative comfort. Poor ones endured bare stone and thin gruel. Most who entered were what long-term inmates. Prisons held those awaiting trial before Lord's Court or royal justices, debtors until payment made, or convicts briefly before punishment. Sentences of lifelong imprisonment were rare and costly. Execution, fine, or banishment came faster. Still, some languished for months while cases stalled or lords delayed. Daily life was spare. Light crept through narrow slit or none at all. Lamps burned smoky when Gaoler brought them. Bedding was straw if one could pay, bare floor otherwise. Food arrived once or twice, bread, broth, water. Better fare if family sent or prisoner bribed. Chains might bind ankles or neck to wall. Lesser cells allowed free movement within small space. Conversation murmured among captives when guards out of earshot. News, prayers, pleas. Not all cells were equal. Debt rooms, sometimes decent, shared by tradesmen who'd fallen behind. Felons might be thrown into deeper pits, literally oubliettes, forgotten places reached by rope. These rarely killed directly, but crushed hope with dark and filth. Some castles kept wet dungeons near moat, where water seeped cold and foul. Legends grew around such pits. Travelers whispered of skeletal remains and cries heard at night. Fear shaped the Gaol's air. Chains clinked, rats skittered, damp dripped. Prisoners prayed loudly or whispered bargains to saints. Some carved marks on wall to count days. Hope rose when keys rattled, visitor, advocate, or gaoler bringing news of bail. Despair deepened when no one came. Executioners sometimes entered to measure man or test rope, grim reminder of fate ahead. Yet mercy appeared too. Families visited with food, blankets, and candles. Priests came to hear confession, give last rites, or offer comfort. Charitable guilds sometimes paid debtors' dues to free poor neighbors. Some lords pardoned on feast days. Some towns had custom of releasing minor offenders at Easter. Bells might ring when prisoners walked out forgiven. Trial days broke monotony. Prisoners led to hall or courtyard, irons clanking to face lord or sheriff. Juries of neighbors or sworn men heard case, oaths sworn on gospel. Witnesses spoke. Sentences came swift, fine, whipping, stocks, or death. Those acquitted rejoiced. Those condemned returned briefly to cell before punishment. Escape was rare but legendary. Stories tell of lovers bribing gaoler, ropes smuggled in wine casks, monks tunneling from cell. Most ended in recapture and harsher fate, but a few succeeded, vanishing into forest or distant town, tales told for years around hearth. Dungeon life inside castles carried special weight. Political prisoners, rival nobles, captured knights, sometimes kept for ransom. They might have decent quarters with books, wine, even servants, yet remain closely guarded. Others endured harsh isolation. The same castle could hold both, a lord's rival dining above rats, while peasant thief rotted below. Spiritual care was constant. Chaplains visited, prisoners confessed, seeking absolution before death. Some cells bore scratched prayers or crude crosses. Pilgrim badges and saints' images hung if allowed. Belief in saving soul gave strength when body failed. Guilds also served public spectacle. Stocks and pillories outside let townspeople jeer petty thieves. Markets filled with gawkers when prisoners paraded to gallows. Justice was seen and felt, meant to warn as much as punish. Yet behind these moments lay long, quiet nights of fear and waiting in the cells. Season marked suffering. Winter froze stone, water iced in jugs, breath hung white. Summer stank with rot and heat, vermin multiplied. Spring floods sometimes seeped into pits. Autumn brought damp chill. A prisoner's health often broke before judgment, hence wealth and bribes could mean survival. Poverty often meant death without sentence. Still, not all was cruelty. Some gaolers were kindly, bringing extra straw or food, passing letters, turning blind eye to small comforts. Communities sometimes pressured for mercy when crimes minor. The idea of justice mixed with local understanding. Thieves who stole bread to live might be whipped, not killed. Brawlers fined rather than maimed. Harsh yet human in its way. At dawn after execution night, silence deepened. A cell stood empty, straw left scattered. Other prisoners watched keys swing and wondered about their fate. Outside, villagers returned to work, perhaps sobered, perhaps merely relieved. Life went on, but memory of dark cells lingered. So when picturing medieval punishment, think beyond gallows to these dim stone rooms. The dungeon and the gaol held many kinds, debtor and traitor, poacher and knight. Fear dwelt there, but also prayers, small kindnesses, and stubborn will to live. They remind us that justice then was both rough and personal, and that night behind bars was long indeed. As dusk began to settle over the castle town, a single bell rang from the watchtower above the gatehouse. Its slow, deliberate toll signaled the change of guard and the coming of night. In the square below, tradesmen hurried to close their shutters, the last market stalls packed up with a rattle of boards and barrels. Through the gathering shadows walked the captain of the watch, his cloak dark against the fading light, his boots striking a steady rhythm on the cobbles. He was a man of middle years, scarred and calm-eyed, with the quiet authority of one long used to danger. His sword hung at his hip, but he rarely touched it. His voice and presence were weapon enough. Behind him followed two sergeants, lanterns unlit for now, their hands resting easy on spear shafts. Together they crossed the square, stopping now and then to speak with merchants or nod to townsfolk heading home. The captain's first duty each evening was the tour of the gates. He climbed the worn stone stair to the parapet above the great oak doors where the guards stood ready. There he spoke with the day watch, asking what travellers had passed, if any quarrels had arisen, if news had come from the roads. His questions were quiet but precise. Nothing escaped his notice. Then he inspected the portcullis and drawbridge chains, tested the lock of the postern gate, and peered out at the dim road beyond. Next he visited the wall towers, their narrow stairs echoing with his measured tread. In each he checked the brazier for warmth, the horn for signalling alarm, the state of the crossbows and stones kept for defense. He praised a clean and ready post, frowned at a lantern left untrimmed, and spoke a word of encouragement to young watchmen nervous in their first night duty. Where fear lingered, his calm steadiness seemed to banish it. When his circuit of the walls was complete, the captain returned to the watch barracks near the gate. Here men gathered to hear the night's orders. Some were veterans, easy in their armor, others green-faced lads hoping to impress. The captain spoke simply, where each patrol would walk, which taverns to watch for trouble, which roads to keep clear for late merchants. He reminded them to help townsfolk first, to keep swords sheathed unless need demanded, and to bring prisoners unharmed if they could. Then the watch dispersed. Lanterns were lit, casting warm circles on the darkening streets. Pairs of guards set off in measured rhythm, their boots echoing against the timbered houses. The captain did not always lead a patrol himself, but tonight he chose to walk with one through the busier quarter near the river. It was a place of taverns and warehouses, where laborers drank and sailors brawled when pay was good. The streets there smelled of ale and fish, of smoke from hearth fires and the river's damp breath. Taverns spilled lamplight and laughter onto the cobbles. The captain walked steadily, greeting barkeeps by name, listening for the pitch of voices that meant quarrel or danger. When he saw a drunken pair begin to shove, he stepped forward with calm authority. His sergeants stayed close, but often his voice alone was enough to cool tempers. "Go home," he said quietly, and they did. Now and then he stopped to question strangers, merchants still unloading, sailors seeking lodging, travelers with packs and road-wearied faces. His manner was firm but fair. Most answered readily, glad for safety under his watch. Those who bristled at his questions met an unflinching gaze that needed no drawn sword. Later in the night, a runner came breathless with word of theft in the upper town. The captain turned at once, striding swiftly with his men. At a merchant's house they found a window pried and goods gone. He examined the marks of the crowbar, questioned neighbors gently but thoroughly, and set 2 guards to search the lanes for suspicious figures. Calm and methodical, he comforted the anxious merchant and promised fair pursuit. Sometimes the watch faced darker matters. A body found in an alley, a brawl turned deadly, or whispers of spies. Then the captain's tone hardened but remained steady. He called for torches, examined signs with a soldier's eye, and sent trusted men to fetch the steward or the Lord's bailiff. Justice here was deliberate, not hasty, and the captain kept it so for when anger rose among the townsfolk. Toward midnight the streets grew still. Doors and shutters were closed, taverns quieted, only the soft glow of lanterns marking the patrols. The captain returned to the gatehouse to check on the outer watch. Together they drank a little warmed ale, spoke softly of the day's small troubles, and listened to the night sounds. The river lapping against pilings, an owl's call, the faint bark of a distant dog. Sometimes he walked the silent lanes alone. Lantern swinging, he knew every alley and court, every place where shadows lingered. He walked not as a hunter but as a guardian, trusting the peace his presence brought. Few dared mischief when the captain's boots sounded on the stones. Before dawn he made one final round. The night watch, weary but proud, greeted him as he passed. He thanked them quietly, but the words carried weight, and noted any trouble for the steward's morning report. Then he returned to the barracks, just as the first pale light touched the roofs. When the day guard came yawning to relieve the night watch, the captain met them at the gate. He gave his orders, spoke of the night's events, and handed over the keys and the rolled reports. Then at last he allowed himself a slow breath. Another night had passed without riot or ruin, and the town under the castle slept safe through his vigilance. Though his work held danger and long hours, the captain of the watch took no pride in fear. His craft was quiet safety, a steady eye, a calm word, a sword drawn only when all else failed. As the sun rose and townsfolk stepped out to sweep doorsteps and open shops, few gave thought to the man who had walked their streets in darkness. Yet it was his unseen watch that kept peace through the long medieval night. When the sun sinks behind the rooftops and shutters close one by one, the streets of a medieval town do not fall silent. They change voice. Merchants pack stalls. Housewives call children in. The smell of hearth smoke thickens. But somewhere a horn sounds the curfew. Gates swing shut. Guards fasten the great bar. And out from the guardhouse steps the town watch, lanterns in hand, bills and staves at their shoulders, keepers of the night. By day, authority lives in market court and Guildhall. By night, it walks the lanes. Watchmen are drawn from varied cloth. Some are paid men-at-arms, veterans too old for hard war but still steady. Others are townsmen fulfilling duty, each craft sending one to serve when bell call. A captain of the watch commands, chosen for steadiness rather than swordplay alone. They gather at dusk. Buckle belts, light horn lanterns, shielded against wind, check that locks and keys hang safe. The town itself changes with darkness. Streets narrow as fear, corners loom, the comforting bustle of day thins to quiet. Only taverns spill light and laughter, sometimes too loud. Dogs roam, sniffing refuse. Somewhere a cart rumbles late, wheels echoing. The night watch knows each alley and gate, each tavern likely to brew quarrel, each yard where thieves might slip. Their feet on cobbles sound slow and deliberate, a warning and reassurance in one. First task is patrolling the walls and gates. They check hinges, test the great bar, peer over parapets at fields fading into dusk. Travelers arriving after gates shut may call for entry. Watch decides if safe to admit. Merchants who dawdled at fairs plead. Peasants laden with produce beg. Sometimes a known man is let in for fee. Strangers may wait till dawn in gatehouse. Smugglers and spies fear this moment most, for a sharp-eyed captain can sniff falsehood like a hound. Within the town, watch follows set beats. Main streets first, where lamps hung at corners burn low. They trim wicks, add oil, or light fresh torches when provided. Many towns demand each house hang a lantern outside. Fines await those who forget. Small lanes follow, darker and full of whisper. Here watchmen listen for breaking shutters, hushed footsteps, cry of alarm. Quiet crime thrives at night. Petty theft, housebreaking, brawls by alehouse door. A quick knock of staves of cobble or sharp hoe there often scatters mischief before it blooms. Taverns and alehouses draw close attention. Laughter is fine, singing too, but drunken quarrels breed knives. Watchmen step inside now and then, lantern beam cutting smoke, to remind all of law. Alewives know them, sometimes bribe with mug of warm ale to keep good temper. If fight erupts, watch hauls offenders ought, cools them in lockup till morning court. Many a foolish lad sobers on straw cell floor after such night. Some nights bring fire's greatest terror of medieval town. Watch sniffs for smoke, eyes roofs for telltale glow. A cry of fire changes all bells ring. Buckets form chains from well or river. Watch directs with urgent voice. Fire hooks pull down thatch to stop spread. In these hours, their authority is unquestioned. They save whole wards from ash. Other dangers stalk dark footpaths, lying in wait for lone travelers. burglars prying shutters, smugglers shifting contraband, and sometimes wolves if gates stand near wild. Watch carries bills, polearms with hook and spike, good for both fight and hauling drunk from gutter. Horn or rattle warns comrades if trouble. Most foes melt at first shout, but a good watchman knows when to push and when to retreat for help. Religion shades the night. Watch may pause at church porch to pray or bow passing shrine. Bells mark hours, compline then matins. Monks' chants drift over roofs, while watch moves below. In some towns, patrols avoid cemetery paths, half from piety, half from fear of spirits. Superstitions run deep, charms in pockets, whispered psalms when shadow seems wrong. Yet duty keeps feet steady. Pay varies. Some towns give coin nightly, others grant exemptions from tax or guild duty. Rotating service means a weaver might walk one night, a smith the next, sharing burden. Permanent watchmen enjoy modest wage and steady bread, sometimes a small cottage by gate. Pride grows from roll. They guard sleep of neighbors, keep thieves at bay, and their lantern glow means safety to late-walking midwife or apprentice returning from errands. Seasons change work. Winter brings long, dark, and bitter cold. Cloaks pulled tight, lanterns struggle against wind. Snow muffles footfalls, thieves love it. Summer nights short but lively with fairs, music, and drunken revels spilling into lanes. Harvest time sees wagon trains late. Watch must guide them safe past sleeping houses. In storms they hunch under cloaks, but still pace. No weather excuses absent eyes. Sometimes watch aids justice directly. A thief caught may be held till market court. A murderer, rare but feared, kept under heavy guard for sheriff or lord's men. They serve writs, summon folk to appear before bailiff, escort prisoners to gallows on execution day. Their staves are less for killing than for control, yet weight enough to fell man if desperate. Not all love the watch. Some grumble at curfew, fines for unlit lantern, or fees at gate. Young men play tricks, running ahead to douse lamps, shouting false alarms. But when real danger comes, fire, brawl, strange riders, resentment turns to gratitude. A good captain balances firmness with neighborly sense, knowing these streets hold his kin too. Curfew is serious. After bell, no one walks without night pass from bailiff or guild. Midwives, doctors, or messengers sometimes bear such writ. Others caught wandering answer to court. Some fine, some put in stocks by dawn. This keeps peace, but also gives watch cause to question every shadow. Midnight is hardest hour. Cold deepens, taverns quiet, only echo of watch boots and occasional bark of dog. They pause at crossroads, check locks on granary, listen to sleeping town breathe. A faint candle in window comforts someone awake, perhaps weaving or tending child. They are unseen guardians, often unthanked, yet proud. toward dawn, roosters crow, bakers stoke ovens, miller turns wheel, merchants stir. Watch ends its beat, returning to guardhouse tired but satisfied. Captain logs night's events, fines issued, fires doused, drunks cooled. They hand keys to day gatekeeper and slip home as sun gilds tiles. Town wakes safe because unseen eyes kept dark at bay. So when you picture medieval night, see not only shadow and fear, see lantern glow weaving through mist, boots steady on cobble, quiet voices warning, comforting, commanding. The watch and night patrol were thin but vital line between rest and ruin. Ordinary men keeping extraordinary faith with their sleeping neighbors. The morning of the trial broke pale and cool, a thin mist curling above the castle yard. Word had gone out the night before, and by dawn folk from the town and nearby hamlets gathered to watch. Trials were solemn and rare. Most quarrels ended in fines or oaths, but some matters, grave crimes or questions of honor, were left to God's judgment by combat. Today 2 men would meet in the yard to prove truth with steel. The ground had been swept and leveled. Sand was strewn to hide the mud, and a rough barrier of timber rails marked the combat ring. At one end stood a small platform for the Lord and his household. At the other, a raised seat for the steward and scribes who would witness the oaths. Along the rails, townsfolk clustered, murmuring softly, faces pale with awe and curiosity. A few children clung to mothers' skirts, eyes wide. Before the combatants arrived, priests processed into the yard. They bore a crucifix and holy water, their voices low in prayer. The chapel bell tolled 3 slow notes, calling all to silence. The Lord emerged then, wrapped in a long fur-lined cloak against the chill, and took his place on the platform. Knights stood behind him, helms in hand, faces grave. This was no tourney for sport. This was justice. The accused came first. He was a broad-shouldered man, a miller by trade, his face set and pale beneath his cap. Chains had been struck from his wrists, but still hung loose about his belt. He walked with 2 guards at his side, head held stiffly, eyes fixed on the sand ahead. Behind him followed his kin, grim and silent. He knelt briefly before the Lord's seat, then stepped into the ring. Opposite him entered the accuser, a knight of middling years, lean and stern. His surcoat bore his household arms, and he carried his own sword and shield. He bowed deeply to the Lord and then to the priests before taking his place at the other end of the ring. His face was unreadable, his manner calm but intent. The herald stepped forward, unrolling a parchment. In a clear voice he proclaimed the matter, an accusation of murder, denied by the accused, demanded trial by combat according to ancient rite. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, quickly hushed. When the herald finished, the chaplain raised his crucifix high, and both men knelt to swear their oaths. Each declared his cause just, and called upon God to grant victory to the innocent. Then came the arming. The knight was already dressed in padded gambeson and mail. He strapped on his helm and lifted his shield with practiced ease. The miller wore only a thickly quilted jack and leather cap, his weapon a stout mace provided by the steward. Both tested their grips and stood ready. The chaplain sprinkled them with holy water. The steward checked that each weapon was sound. The air grew tense and very still. The Lord rose and lifted his hand. "Let God decide," he said, voice carrying over the yard. The herald blew his horn once, long and low. With that, the combat began. At first the two circled, cautious. The knight held his sword high and shield close. The miller gripped his mace in both hands, eyes darting for an opening. The crowd hardly breathed. Then, with a sudden cry, the knight struck, his blade flashing toward the miller's shoulder. The mace swung up in time to block, the blow glancing off with a dull thud. Sand sprayed under their boots as they closed and broke apart again. Blow followed blow, slow and heavy. This was no swift joust, but a grueling trial, fought by men with fear and faith alike in their hearts. The knight pressed with skill, his sword ringing against the miller's mace and padded coat. The miller, though untrained, fought with raw strength, his great swings forcing the knight back more than once. Each strike drew gasps from the watching crowd. Between bouts they circled, panting, weapons lowered for a heartbeat. Sweat streaked the miller's face despite the chill. The knight's mail glinted dull where sand clung to it. Both glanced toward the crucifix, silent prayers flashing across tired faces. The chaplain murmured softly from the rail, though his words were lost in the wind. At last the fight turned. The knight feinted left and swung right, his sword catching the edge of the miller's cap and cutting deep into his brow. Blood ran down the man's face as he staggered back. Still he fought on, roaring with desperate strength, his mace smashing against the knight's shield with a sound like splitting wood. But the knight pressed harder, steady and relentless, driving him step by step across the sand. With a final cry, the miller stumbled. The knight's sword struck true, knocking the mace from his grasp and sending him sprawling. The field went silent but for his ragged breath. The knight stood over him, blade poised. Then he stepped back and raised the sword to the Lord in salute. The herald's horn sounded again, short, sharp, final. The trial was ended. The chaplain hurried to the fallen man, tending the wound with cloth, and whispered prayer. The Lord spoke, his judgment quiet but firm. The knight's cause upheld, the miller guilty in the eyes of man and God. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some sorrowful, some grimly satisfied. The defeated man, bleeding but alive, was taken into custody once more. His fate would be the Lord's to decide, often death, sometimes a fine or exile if mercy was shown. His kin wept softly as he was led away. The victor bowed to the Lord and then to the chapel, thanking God aloud for righteous aid. He looked weary, not joyful. A man who had fought for honor but found no pleasure in another's fall. As the crowd dispersed, life crept slowly back. Merchants reopened shutters. Children, now chattering, chased one another with sticks. Yet many glanced back at the sanded ring, its surface darkened by blood. The trial by combat was rare for good reason. It was hard and sobering, a thing that left the heart heavy even when justice seemed clear. When the yard emptied, servants raked fresh sand over the marks and washed blood from the rails. The crucifix was carried back to the chapel. The herald rolled his scroll and departed. Only the echo of the fight lingered, a memory in the stones and in the hearts of those who had watched. By dusk the place was quiet again, the castle resuming its ordinary life. Yet in every hearthside tale that night the trial was spoken of, the fear, the prayers, the clash of weapons, and the heavy truth that sometimes justice wears a soldier's face and leaves a scar behind. Mist drifted over the river meadows and crept up the slope to the castle walls, softening the hard lines of stone and timber as if the morning itself wished to calm harsh deeds. In the outer yard, men-at-arms stamped their feet against the chill, while the steward's clerks checked tallies and seals. Word had passed through village and town the evening before. A bandit was to be tried in the hall at first bell. The townsfolk came soberly, not to feast their eyes on misfortune, but because judgment, when given in public, bound the law to the land and to the memory of all who witnessed it. The great doors stood open when the bell ceased. The hall was swept and strewn with fresh rushes, mixed with mint to sweeten the air. Trestle tables had been carried aside, and the long space felt almost like a nave, with the dais for altar and the Lord for priest of worldly order. Candles burned in iron sconces, throwing soft light upon banners dulled by many winters of smoke. Near the hearth, a pot of spiced wine warmed for the household, casting a faint sweetness into the scent of tallow and ash. The Lord entered with measured tread, mail hidden beneath dark wool, his sword peace-bound with a cord of leather. At his side walked the lady, whose quiet gaze softened what harshness duty might require. Behind them came the chaplain in black, lips already moving in prayer, and the steward, thin and exact, with a roll of parchment under his arm. Men-at-arms lined the walls. The beadle stood by the door with staff in hand to keep order among those gathered. They brought in the prisoner when all were set. He was not large, but the lean strength of the woods clung to him, as did the mud of hedge and ditch. His hair fell in dark tangles to his shoulders. His wrists bore iron rings polished by use. He looked about the hall once, as men will always look upon the place where they may be condemned or forgiven, and then he fixed his gaze upon the rushes at his feet. The beadle proclaimed silence, and the chaplain's prayer rose above the creak of leather and the small coughs of the crowd. He spoke of justice and mercy, of the peace of God which kings and lords must keep with steady hand. When his amen settled, the steward stepped forward and unfurled his roll. In a clear voice he named the man, gave his village, and read the charge, that on the road by the willow ford he had stopped. A merchant's cart with drawn knife, taken a purse heavy with coin, and struck the merchant's boy who tried to seize him. The accusation didn't come from parchment alone. The merchant himself stood near the bar of the hall, his cloak decent though travel-worn, his face grey with the memory of fear. Beside him the boy kept a bandage at his temple, though the wound beneath had half healed. The steward pointed to them and asked the prisoner if he knew these persons and the place and hour named. The man inclined his head and said softly that he knew the willow ford as any who trod those ways might know it, and as to the men, he had never seen them in peace. The law of the hall ran on old rails. The steward laid out how things would go. Witnesses were to speak and the prisoner to answer. The chaplain might pose questions of conscience. The Lord would render judgment with the counsel of his lady and his household officers. Trial by combat did not apply to ambush in a ditch and ordeal, which had once decided dark matters with water or iron. The chaplain would not grant unless doubt clouded all else. The bandit, if such he proved, might clear himself of the full weight of accusation by oath, help neighbors, swearing to his good name, but outlawry left a man thin of friends. The merchant told his tale, voice measured at first, and then quick with remembered fright. He spoke of the narrow road, the drooping willow branches trailing in the stream, and the moment when his horse shied at a shape rising from the reeds. A voice demanded the purse for toll, and a blade showed in the grey light. He had tossed the purse, he said, and that should have been the end. But his boy leapt from the cart, foolish and brave, to strike the thief. There had been a blow, a tumble, and mud, and when the boy rose, blood ran. The steward asked what could be sworn of the thief's face. The merchant with care described a narrow scar beside the mouth and a woven thong bound around the wrist, knotted as foresters knot it when they set snares. He pointed to the prisoner and said he bore both marks. The boy, shy and pale, added only that the man had moved like one who knows the ground better than any map might show, and that his eyes had cut and measured as surely as his knife. The steward called next for those who had hunted the man. 2 men-at-arms spoke of a chase through briar and ash, of an old fox den in a bank where a wallet had been thrust, and of coins found within, silver-stamped with a foreign mint like the marks on the merchant's remaining purse. They spoke of broken twigs and the smell of smoke in a hollow stump, and of a man who knew where to place his foot, so no sound would carry. When it came time for the prisoner to answer, He stepped forward without raising his eyes. He did not deny the scar or the thong at his wrist. He did not deny being upon the willow road. What he said, and said again when pressed, was that hunger had a knife as sharp as any steel, and that winter had bitten him first. The law was the law, he said, and he would not spit at it, but a man who has not eaten for 2 days and sees his sister's boy with hollows under his eyes will take a purse that the rich may call a trifle and the poor may call life. The hall breathed like a single creature. There were murmurs from the peasants near the door, and a stillness like drawn silk among the merchants and masters. Outrage did not sound so loud as pity, and pity did not drown the old fear that if the roads turned lawless, bread and cloth and salt would never reach their proper markets. The Lord's jaw tightened. The lady's hands, folded upon her lap, did not move. The chaplain asked then about the boy struck in the ford. The prisoner lifted his head a little and said his hand had gone out toward the blow, that he had meant to run rather than cut, and that the boy's blood was a sorrow he would carry. The boy, stammering, said the knife had flashed and pain followed, but he could not say whether anger or fear had guided the blow. He would not swear the man had sought to kill. Such words mattered more than any clever speech. The steward's face, which seldom showed much beyond the habit of duty, softened by a hair's breadth. He asked if any would stand as oath helpers for the prisoner, neighbors or kin who would lay hand upon the holy book and swear that the man had kept good repute until the day the ford and the knife came together. A dull silence followed, broken by the scrape of a shoe upon stone and the cough of a tired child in the back. At last an old woman, bent as a bow, stepped forward with the help of a girl. She was the aunt the man had named, though she did not give him the courtesy of looking toward him at once. She told the hall that he had mended fences and cut wood for her when her hands shook with age. She said his father had died of a cough that winter, and his small store gone to pay for burial and candles. She said he was quick of temper, but not cruel. When the steward asked whether she would swear upon the book that his name was honest to the ford, she nodded and pressed her cracked lips upon the leather. 2 more came. A shepherd with a limp who said the man had once pulled a lamb from the river and asked no coin for it, and a boy in a patched jerkin who said nothing of oaths, but stood as if his very standing were all he could give. The steward took the 2 solemnly, for the law asks flesh to speak for flesh when written words are thin. It was not much, but it was not nothing, and the hall felt it. The merchant, when asked if he had further say, said he would not see the roads given to wolves, but he would not press for the rope if the Lord found a lesser edge for the law. His voice was steady but weary, like a man who has traveled far and found more dust than lodging. The boy watched the prisoner with a child's wary wonder, seeing perhaps a likeness to the men who sometimes came out of the woods to trade a sack of mushrooms for a little salt. The steward spoke of custom, that robbery on the king's road drew the gallows, for it was a wounding of the peace that all men shared. Yet he also spoke of times when the law had turned its palm and made the thief pay by labor and watch, under guard and oath, till silver and hurt were reckoned in the balance. The chaplain, asked for counsel, said that God's mercy was not the breaking of justice, but its fulfillment in pity, if the wounded could be healed and the wrong set right. The Lord sat long without speaking. His household knew this silence. It was the stillness that had weighed grain and measured stones for many years. When he raised his eyes to the prisoner, the hall straightened without knowing why. He asked whether the man, if spared the rope, would bind himself to a year's service under guard, laboring at the stone pits and the river wharf, with wages set aside to make good the merchant's loss and alms given to the apothecary for the boy's healing. He asked whether the man would forswear the willow road and all roads by night, save under watch, until the year ended. The prisoner swallowed, and in the small lift of his throat there was more fear than in any shouting. He bowed his head and said he would bind himself, and he would thank the hall for the chance. The old aunt pressed her knuckles to her mouth and wept without sound. The steward looked to the merchant, who after a moment nodded and said that if the silver returned and the road grew safer, he would call the matter closed at year's end. The judgment fell like a gentle hammer. The Lord spoke it plain, no gallows to be raised, but a year's labor under guard, wages held in trust, to mend the purse and aid the wounded boy, and if he fled, then outlawry anew, and no shelter but the trees and the wolves. The beadle struck the flagstones once with his staff to mark the decree, and the hall breathed out. They led the man away then, not as one dragged by the neck, but as one turned upon a hard road that might yet lead to a gate. The irons remained on his wrists, but the hands within them seemed different now, as if the iron had not crushed the bones of his hope. The guards did not jostle him. The chaplain walked a little behind, praying softly not for miracle, but for strength to keep ordinary promises. The lady rose and went to the boy with the bandage. She set her hand lightly upon his hair and asked the merchant, low-voiced, whether the apothecary had all he needed. When he shook his head with the care of one who has counted his coins too often, she told the steward to take from the Lord's almonry for tinctures and poultices. The law, she said, had found a measure. Care must measure the rest. The words were plain, but they threaded mercy through the warp of justice as skillfully as any weaver might draw bright silk across a loom. The people trickled out through the great doors into the pale day. They spoke in low tones as they went, not of triumph or defeat, but of the steadiness of law and of the year now set before the man. In the yard a hawk turned upon a tether, feathers ruffling in the faint breeze. Beyond the walls, the willow ford ran as ever, water over stone, whispering old things to any who bent to listen. In the afternoon, the steward wrote the judgment in the roll and pricked a small cross beside it. to mark that alms had been given for healing. The scribe sanded the wet ink and tied the parchment closed with a narrow strip of leather. The eedle took the copy to the wharf master and to the foreman of the stone pits, whose faces were marked by weather and habit, men who measured days by loads and tides rather than by words upon a page. At the wharf, ropes creaked and water slapped pilings. Men in wool and leather strained to heave casks and stones, their breath clouding in the chill air. The foreman listened to the beadle and nodded, then set his chalk mark upon a board where the names of the day's hands were scrawled. He had seen such judgments before. He knew that in a year, with watch and fair wage held in trust, a man might be renewed like a field allowed to lie fallow and then sown. At the stone pits the earth opened in grey shelves, birds calling from the chalky edges where grass clung stubbornly. Hammers rang and dust rose in pale veils. The guard who would keep the man there was old in the service, with eyes that had seen both cruelty and compassion. He took the eedle's note and tucked it beneath the thong of his wrist, then returned to his slow pacing along the rim, counting men by habit more than by need. In the evening, when the hall was set again for supper, the rushes brushed and the candles trimmed, the lord ate plainly and spoke little. The lady's veil caught the firelight when she turned her head to ask the steward about the apothecary's fee. The chaplain lifted a cup and blessed the bread and the salt, as he had at 1,000 such meals. Outside, the town began to hum with the small sounds of night, shutters drawn, a dog barking once, the river muttering to itself like an old friend telling a story it has told often. The prisoner slept in a small stone chamber under the gatehouse, wrists free now but door locked, a guard's step regular in the passage beyond. He lay on a pallet of straw and listened to the soft thud of the sentry's boots, which, though they bound him, also meant that no one would take him for hanging in the dark. In the morning he would walk to the pits with a rope at his waist and a man beside him with a spear, and the day would be filled with weight and dust. He turned his face to the rough wall and whispered a name only he knew, and then he slept. Days grew from that judgment like beads upon a string. The boy's wound knit and left a pale line to mark a moment when the world had turned harsh and then gentled. The merchant passed the willow ford again, and though his fingers twitched at the purse, he found he could breathe evenly where once his breath had broken. The men at the wharf learned the prisoner's gait and the steadiness of his back beneath a load. The men at the pits learned the measure of his swing and how he did not grumble when the chalk dust found his throat. The foreman kept a small slate on which he scratched the day's labor and the wage owed. Each seventh day, a clerk from the steward's office came with a leather purse and a roll, counted the marks, and put coin into a wooden coffer whose keys were 3, one for the steward, one for the merchant, one for the chaplain who saw to the boy's healing. The prisoner watched the coins fall and did not reach for them, but something in his shoulders loosened as the coffer grew heavy. Through winter and the first sweet stirrings of spring, the tale held its path. Once, in sleet and shaky light, the bandit, though men seldom called him that now, slipped at the pit's edge and would have fallen but for the guard's quick hand upon the rope. He turned then and met the old soldier's eyes, and a kind of oath passed between them without word or book. On another day, at the wharf, when a cask burst and men cursed at the loss, he worked past dark without being told, hands bleeding against the staves until the remaining cargo was safe. When the year grew near its turn, the steward called the party to the hall again. The merchant came with the boy, taller now, the pale scar almost hidden beneath hair. The foreman and the wharf master came with ledgers and a certain pride at being asked into the places of banners and benches. The guard from the pits came too, though he stood against the wall and would not be coaxed nearer, as if his boots had forgotten how to cross a lord's polished floor. They brought the man in without rope. He stood before the dais, leaner still, face weathered with quarry dust and river wind, and the room seemed smaller for the change that had passed through him. The steward read the tallies, the purse made whole with a little to spare, the apothecary's fee met, the tithe for the poor paid from what remained according to custom. He asked the merchant if he was satisfied in silver. The merchant bowed and said yes, and more than silver, he was satisfied in the keeping of the roads. The chaplain asked the boy, as a teacher asks before he sets aside the rod, whether the man had sought him harm since. The boy shook his head and said he had once seen him lifting a cask, as if it were a child, and the memory had changed the weight of other memories in his mind. The lady asked the guard if the man had kept his word. The guard nodded, and his mouth moved once before he mastered it, for words had grown careful in him. He said the man had kept more than the letter of the law. He had kept the day. The Lord rose then, not with pomp, but with that mild gravity which people feel in their bones when something true is about to be spoken. He said the year had been kept, and the debt was paid, and the peace restored as far as men may restore what fear has broken. He took a small knife from his belt and cut the leather cord from the man's wrist, the snaresman's thong that had once bound more than flesh. He told him he might walk where he would, save that the willow ford was to be crossed with uncovered head and a prayer for any man's boy who might pass. The bandit bowed, which is to say the man bowed, for names fall away when they do not fit. He did not speak, perhaps because the words would have come rough from a throat used to dust and wind, or perhaps because there are times when to spared is itself a speech. He turned and walked out under the heavy doors into the light, and those who watched found their own hearts walking with him, as if a small stone that had sat long upon the chest had shifted and let the ribs lift. In the days that followed, the willow branches trailed the stream as ever. Children fished with crooked pins at the ford. Merchants crossed, purses tucked but not clenched. Travelers paused to drink and to give thanks, each in the manner he knew. The law, which loves a straight road, had found a bend that did not break, and the memory of the hall's quiet weighing lingered like the scent of mint in rushes long after the stalks were swept. Not all tales end so, and the people knew it. There would be other trials and other days when the rope cast its shadow on the green, but this one settled into the village talk like a worn coin that passes from hand to hand, valued for what it has bought, not only repayment, but a kind of mending that makes the roads safer to tread, and the night less fearful to travelers and to those who wait for them. At night, when the hall's candles guttered low and the embers sank into a red hush, the steward would sometimes pass his fingers over the roll where a small cross marked the case. The chaplain, closing his book, would breathe a prayer for men who stumble, and for hands that grasp and pull them steady. And in a little house at the lane, an old woman would cut her bread a shade thicker, because a nephew came when called and chopped wood without being bid, and the world can be measured in such small, sure weights. On the far side of the town, just beyond the last row of cottages, there was a small field known to all. It was a quiet place most days, grass growing long, birds picking among the hedges, but its name carried a weight that hushed voices. The execution green, when justice reached its hardest edge, when theft, treason, or murder had met its end in the Lord's court, it was here that the sentence was carried out. At dawn on the appointed day, the town stirred early. People rose not with joy, but with a somber curiosity, for such events were rare and solemn. Merchants shuttered their shops or left apprentices to mind them. Farmers on their way to the fields paused to speak of the coming judgment. By mid-morning, a slow stream of townsfolk and villagers moved toward the green, quiet and respectful. The scaffold had been built the day before. Carpenters had worked under the watch of the captain of the guard, raising stout beams and securing the trapdoor with ropes and pegs. For a hanging there would be a gallows, for a beheading a low wooden block, and sometimes both, if judgment was uncertain until the last. A simple rail kept the crowd back. Beyond it stood a space for the Lord's men, priests, and heralds. Before the hour, priests came to bless the place. They sprinkled holy water on the scaffold, murmuring prayers that justice be tempered with mercy, and that the soul of the condemned might find peace. Their quiet voices and the faint scent of incense lent the green a strange, hushed air. Birds sang faintly in the hedgerow, unaware of the human weight gathering there. The crowd gathered slowly, men in work clothes, women with shawls pulled tight, children kept close but not always shielded. Some came from duty, some from curiosity, a few from personal grief or anger. All stood quietly, speaking in low voices. This was no fair or feast. It was the law made visible, and even those who had no love for the Lord felt its solemnity. Then came the procession. From the town gate emerged the captain of the guard, riding slowly at the head of a file of soldiers. Behind them walked the condemned. Some came silently, heads bowed. Others prayed aloud or called out to the crowd. Shackles clinked with each step. The priest walked close, holding a crucifix or murmuring prayers. Sometimes family followed, weeping softly. Sometimes no one did. When they reached the scaffold, the herald stepped forward to read the sentence. His voice was clear and formal, naming the crime and the judgment. He spoke not with hatred, but with ritual weight, each word part of a long tradition meant to show that this act belonged to the law, not to vengeance. The crowd listened in silence, broken only by the sigh of the wind. If there were final words, they came now. Some condemned spoke fiercely, proclaiming innocence or cursing enemies. Others asked forgiveness or whispered prayers. A few stood mute, eyes fixed far beyond the gathered faces. The priest stayed close, offering comfort, the crucifix lifted for the last glance of faith. Then came the end. For hanging, the noose was placed, the rope checked. For beheading, the condemned was guided to kneel at the block. Soldiers held firm, but not cruelly. The captain gave a small nod when all was ready. A hush deeper than any church fell over the green. Then, swift, decisive act was done. A collective breath passed through the crowd, some gasping, some crossing themselves. The priest prayed over the body, blessing the soul's journey. The herald declared the law fulfilled. Slowly, people turned away, faces thoughtful and quiet. There was little cheering here. Justice, though necessary, sat heavy on the heart. Afterward, the scaffold might stand for a day or two, a silent warning, before carpenters came to dismantle it. The body, if what claimed by kin, was taken for burial beyond consecrated ground. The green returned to stillness, grass growing once more over the place where life had ended. Yet for a time those who had watched would pass by with lowered gaze, remembering. Children asked quiet questions that night. Parents answered with care. Farmers spoke of the Lord's justice, merchants of the need for order, though few spoke with ease. In the alehouse there was murmured talk of guilt, of mercy, of the frailty of all men. Such a day reminded even the boldest that law was real and its edge sharp. The captain of the guard, after all was done, walked the green alone to ensure order. He checked the scaffold, saw to the guard, and then rode slowly back to the castle. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were tired. Justice was his duty, yet he bore its weight in silence. By nightfall, the town resumed its life. Fires were lit, suppers eaten, songs sung softly in a few taverns. Yet beneath it all lingered a quiet sobriety. The execution had been seen and witnessed. The law stood firm. Life went on, but a shadow of solemnity moved with it, a reminder of how thin the line could be between freedom and the rope or the block. The green itself lay silent under the moon, Only the empty scaffold creaked faintly in the night breeze, a lonely sentinel to the day's grim work. In Ain it too would vanish, leaving nothing but grass and memory. But the people would remember, as they always did, long after the morning fog had hidden the last footprints from sight. The day in the Abbey has been long but unhurried, filled with work and prayer, meals and small kindnesses. Now the sun is sinking beyond the fields, and a hush begins to gather like a slow tide. The bell in the tower tolls a single low note, rolling over the cloisters and gardens, calling the brothers to evening prayer. Lanterns flicker to life along the covered walks as sandals whisper toward the great church. In the nave, shadows stretch long across the worn flagstones. Candles glow in steady rows, their flames small but sure against the deepening dusk. The air smells of cool stone, beeswax, and the faint green breath of the garden carried in by evening breeze. One by one, monks enter and bow before taking their stalls in the choir. They come without haste, yet none linger. The rhythm of this hour is well known to all. Vespers begins with a single voice, low and resonant. Another joins, then another, until the whole choir breathes the psalms together. The sound is deep and warm, rising like incense toward the dark rafters above. No note is forced, no word hurried. It is music shaped by centuries, meant not to dazzle, but to soothe and lift hearts heavenward as night approaches. Outside the high windows, the last gold of sunset fades to violet. Birds settle in the eaves. The first bats flit against the glowing sky. Inside, the chant flows on, timeless and unbroken. The abbot leads the prayers with quiet strength, his voice neither louder nor softer than any other, yet steady as a bell. When the Magnificat is sung, the brothers stand, their habits swaying gently as they lift their hearts with merry song. When the final psalm ends, silence holds for a breath before the abbot gives the blessing. A deep Amen answers, and the service closes without applause or fanfare, only calm gratitude. The monks file out again, candles in hand to light the cloister's darkening paths. Outside, night has deepened. The first stars shimmer faintly above the abbey roof. The refectory glows with soft lantern light as the evening meal is shared. It is a simple supper, bread baked this morning, a thin broth fragrant with herbs from the garden, a few apples sliced and passed along the table. The reader's voice is absent tonight. Vespers has filled the need for words. The meal is eaten in silence, each monk savoring the quiet as much as the food. After supper, bowls and boards are cleaned with efficient care. Brothers move gently about their tasks, no sound louder than the clink of pottery or the faint rush of water from the kitchen cistern. Laughter is rare but not forbidden. Sometimes a small smile passes between friends, a wordless gladness for the day shared. When all is done, the abbey settles further. Some brothers return to the cloister walks, pacing slowly beneath the lanterns as they pray the rosary. Others visit the garden one last time to breathe the cool night air. The fountain trickles softly, and the scent of damp herbs mingles with distant wood smoke. The hives are silent now. Bees rest after their day's labor. The church doors remain open for a little while longer, inviting private prayer. A few monks slip inside to kneel alone before the altar. Candles burn steadily, their light gilding the stone and wood in gentle gold. Shadows sway on the walls as the flames tremble. These last moments before full night are cherished. Time to speak heart to God in solitude, to lay down worries before sleep. At last the bell tolls again, softer now, a call to Compline, the final prayer. All gather once more in the church, but the mood is changed from Vespers. If Vespers is a warm sunset, Compline is a quiet lullaby. The chant is low, tender, and brief. Psalms of trust, prayers for safety in the dark hours ahead. Into your hands, O Lord, I commend my spirit, they sing, and the words seem to settle over every stone. When the last note fades, the abbot sprinkles holy water down the rows, blessing each brother. Heads bow, a faint sigh of peace ripples through the gathered men. Then the candles are carried out, and the church darkens behind them, left with only the steady glow of the sanctuary lamp. The cloisters now are quiet but alive with soft light. Lanterns sway gently in the night breeze. Their golden circles of illumination pool on the flagstones. Monks walk in twos or alone, heading back to the dormitory or lingering for one more silent prayer. No speech breaks the calm, only the sound of sandals and the whisper of robes. Stars wheel above the abbey roof, brilliant now in the deep night. The air is cool and smells of damp earth and herbs. Somewhere an owl calls softly from the orchard. Somewhere else a door closes with a muffled thud. The porter makes his final round, checking gates and locks, moving with the ease of long habit. When he is satisfied, he bows briefly toward the church and retires. Inside the dormitory, beds await in quiet rows. Brothers undress in silence, fold habits neatly, and slip beneath simple woolen blankets. A few read by candle for a short while, small prayer books held close, then snuff the flame and settle. Others kneel briefly at their beds before lying down. One by one the room fills with the soft sound of breathing. The abbey itself seems to sleep now. The scriptorium lies dark, its quills cleaned and laid aside. The garden rests under silver moonlight. The refectory is empty, but still smells faintly of bread and herbs. Only the sanctuary lamp burns on, a small flame keeping watch through the hours until dawn. Beyond the walls, the fields grow pale with starlight. A stream glimmers faintly as it winds past orchard and meadow. Villagers nearby have long gone to their beds, comforted by the sight of the abbey's steady tower against the sky. Its bell is silent for now, but its presence alone is enough to promise safety and prayer. Deep night holds the abbey gently. Its silence is it empty but full of faith, of work well done, of lives given to prayer and service. The stars wheel on, the lamp burns quietly, and within the brothers rest in the great stillness they have sought all day. The peace here feels older than stone, older even than song, a quiet that carries through centuries and cradles all who surrender to it. When the first faint light touches the horizon, the bell will wake and call again. But for now night reigns, soft, safe, and filled with a listening silence. It is a silence that comforts, a silence that blesses, a silence that whispers of rest deeper than sleep.